In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, beneath the glittering halls of Topkapi Palace, secrets moved faster than armies. But they weren't carried by soldiers or messengers. They were carried by spies, invisible to the eye, deadly in their silence. From Venetian diplomats to rogue eunuchs, from shadowy concubines to turncoat janissaries, the empire lived not just on conquest, but on information. And for every palace plot that rose in power, 100 others died in the silence of a poisoned cup or a forged letter. The Ottomans didn't just build an empire of walls and towers. They built an empire of eyes and ears. It began early, under Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople. As the empire expanded across 3 continents, control by force became impossible. So Mehmed crafted something far more effective: a web of informants that stretched from the Habsburg courts in Vienna to the Mamluks in Cairo. No territory was too distant, no person too unimportant. Barbers, market vendors, port guards, and even tavern singers were paid in coin or spared punishment for passing whispers. A merchant ship docking late, a foreign ambassador sneaking out of his quarters, a concubine crying in the harem. Everything was noted, everything mattered. Inside the palace, the spy game was even deadlier. The Sultan trusted no one, not his viziers, not his family, not even his guards. So he turned to those most overlooked, the women of the harem and the eunuchs who watched over them. A concubine might spend months seducing a visiting prince, learning his weaknesses. A eunuch might intercept a note, then rewrite it to mislead a rival faction. Even the Valide Sultan, the queen mother, ran her own intelligence network from deep within the palace, using her influence over marriages, gifts, and appointments. Many harem women weren't Turkish or Arab. They were Greek, Circassian, or Slavic. Some were former nobility. Others were placed there deliberately, by foreign powers. And some never forgot where their true loyalties lay. But the game was not just domestic. The Ottoman spy network rivaled any in the world. In Europe, the empire maintained embassies, but often filled with double agents. In Venice, Christian merchants were bribed to report naval movements. In the Balkans, imams and Orthodox priests were quietly recruited to provide updates on resistance movements. Even in the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, pilgrims and scholars were watched. Anyone who questioned the Sultan's religious legitimacy was marked and often disappeared. One of the most feared branches of espionage was the Tersain Kasusu, or dockyard spies. They operated in Istanbul's shipyards and port cities, watching every ship, every sailor, every crate. They knew which ships were delayed and which crews had grown restless. They intercepted letters before they left the city. They monitored coffee houses, where rebellion often began with nothing more than a whisper over a steaming cup. These spies blended into crowds, wearing no uniform, showing no badge. Their only weapon, the power of silence. During the reign of Sultan Murad IV, the spy network grew more brutal and more personal. Murad, paranoid and volatile, banned alcohol, tobacco, and coffee. But rather than trust the janissaries to enforce it, he disguised himself and walked the streets at night, listening to conversations, testing loyalty. It was said that he once sat beside a drunk poet in a tavern, listened to him insult the Sultan, and then personally executed him the next morning. Whether myth or truth, one thing became clear. In the Ottoman Empire, you never knew who was watching. Even the Sultan could be your shadow. But what happened when the spies themselves became too powerful? Some viziers, threatened by the intelligence networks they couldn't control, began purging court informants. Some eunuchs were strangled, others exiled. And yet, the system always reformed itself. New eyes, new whispers, new loyalties. Because in an empire as vast and diverse as the Ottomans, force was never enough. Only knowledge could maintain control. And for that, the empire paid dearly, but gladly. As the 18th and 19th centuries approached, new threats emerged. British diplomats, French revolutionaries, Russian agents. The Ottoman court found itself outmatched in the age of modern espionage. Still, echoes of the old shadow network remained. In every market, every mosque, every mirror of the palace, someone was always listening. By the mid-1800s, the Ottoman Empire was often called the sick man of Europe. But behind that failing facade, the old espionage machine still turned, just more discreetly, more desperately. The palace no longer had the dominance it once enjoyed. Foreign ambassadors roamed the capital with gold and charm, bribing their way into the hearts and minds of Ottoman officials. Every consulate had its own set of informants, each more dangerous than the next. But the Ottomans adapted. The chief of intelligence, a man rarely seen and never named publicly, operated like a ghost in the empire's crumbling walls. He did not hold military rank. He issued no proclamations, yet a single nod from him could send an official into exile or to the noose. One such example was Ali Reza Pasha, a mid-level administrator in Aleppo. He had been suspected of leaking military supply routes to Russian agents in the Caucasus. No trial, no announcement. One night, his guards simply found him hanging in his study, an Ottoman sash tied tightly around his throat. The message was clear: loyalty is life. Betrayal is silence. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Ottoman espionage wasn't who they watched. It was how early they began watching. Boys taken for the Devshirme system, Christian children raised as Muslims to serve the state, were observed from the moment they entered the palace. Trainers watched for ambition. Supervisors noted defiance or secrecy. Some boys were trained not for the battlefield, but for the shadows. They learned to read body language, to extract confessions with smiles, not threats, to eavesdrop in a room full of noise and catch the one word that mattered. Many rose through the ranks not by sword, but by whisper. They became secretaries, scribes, and eventually viziers. Yet even as viziers, they were never safe. In 1622, Sultan Osman II tried to break the Janissaries' power. He plotted to build a new army, loyal only to him, one untainted by bribes and politics. But word of his secret plans leaked, not through his generals, not through his court, but through a single palace servant, a coffee pourer who overheard Osman's private conversation and passed it on to the Janissaries. Within days, Osman was captured, dragged through the streets of Istanbul, and murdered, all because of one whisper. And still, the system endured. In the final century of the empire, even as newspapers spread and telegraphs hummed across continents, the old methods remained. Spies were planted in printing presses. Scribes were watched as they copied government orders. Even palace artists, who painted the faces of dignitaries, were instructed to note any signs of illness, fatigue, or intoxication that might indicate political vulnerability. Nothing was too small. No one was above suspicion. The most feared figure in this silent empire was no longer a general or a sultan. It was often the head eunuch who held the keys to the sultan's private chambers and access to every pillow where secrets were whispered. This man knew every concubine's favorite food, every vizier's nighttime fears, every court musician's whispered love affair. He could deliver a poem that meant a declaration of war, or pass a gift box that carried a final warning. He wielded no sword, and yet he could destroy kingdoms. But eventually, even the best web begins to fray. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I, the palace's shadow networks dissolved. Informants were scattered. Some fled. Some turned to new masters, British, French, or nationalist Turkish leaders. And yet, the legacy remained. Modern Turkish intelligence, and even intelligence agencies in the Middle East and Balkans today, still trace their roots, at least in spirit, to the methods of the Ottomans. Discretion, observation, and the ruthless use of silence. The Ottoman Empire may be remembered for its grand architecture and sweeping conquests, but beneath it all was a quiet war, one that defined its true power. Empires rise by force, but they endure through information. What made the Ottomans so enduring wasn't just their armies or diplomacy. It was their ability to see what others could not, and to act swiftly, silently, before threats ever took shape. In the empire's shadows, silence was not just golden, it was survival. But what if some of these shadow agents survived even after the empire fell? What if the secrets of the Sultans still live on, in unseen archives, in whispered family stories, in old letters never meant to be read? Because in the world of espionage, no secret stays buried forever.